My co-author or co-presenter is Karen Roekard. Karen is an independent scholar. She lives in Berkeley, California, and she is a descendant of people that lived in this village of Rabaruska. Some of her ancestors escaped from there, immigrated from theirs, and some of them died there. And so this is a place dear to her heart. This is a picture showing her with Father Patrick Desbois. I don't know if you know his work, but he authored this work called Holocaust by Bullets, where he talks about, and in fact he started his work in Rabaruska because his grandfather was interned there as a French soldier in World War II. But he has done this work realizing that a lot of people who were there at the time still are living, and so he's gone around and interviewed people in these Ukrainian villages, getting their thoughts and reactions to what happened during these mass executions that the Nazis carried out. Just a little bit of an overview before we're going. Talk a little bit about Rabaruska itself, a little bit about our concept of geospatial macrogenealogy, which is kind of a mouthful, and then more about cadastral maps, and especially focus on GIS for geospatial genealogy. And then if I have time, I'll show you a little bit of our Google Earth applications. So Rabaruska is a town in Ukraine. It's near the Polish border. It's old. It was founded in the mid-15th century. Like a lot of these towns in this part of the world, its governance shifted with changing fortunes. So Austria-Hungary, Poland, Nazi Germany, the USSR, and now Ukraine itself. It was a mixed town, so it wasn't exclusively a Jewish town, but a mixed town of Poles, Ukrainians, and Jews. Post-World War II, it is now essentially entirely Ukrainian. Here's a map of Galicia in 1897. Rabaruska is right here. Lemberg, or as the Russians call it, Lvov, or the Ukrainians call it Lviv, is right down here, so nearby. Rabaruska and World War II. I mentioned that it was the site of a Nazi prison camp. This is where Father Desbois' grandfather was held as a prisoner. It turns out to be located right on the railroad track to the Belzec extermination camp, which is just across the border in Poland. Some of the Jews of Rabaruska were executed there, but many more of them were actually killed just at pits, at mass execution sites. Also, and a lot of people are not aware of this, at the end of World War II, Ukrainian nationalists ethnically cleansed the Poles in that area, and so the Poles are also gone, so now it's exclusively a Ukrainian village. It also, very ironically, is now the site of a Nazi war memorial cemetery, where they've actually taken the bodies of Nazi soldiers that are in this area and created a central cemetery, which of course creates some conflicting emotions, as you might imagine, for a lot of the people. And here's the present day situation of Rabaruska. Here's Lviv or Lemberg down here, Rabaruska here, and then the border in blue right there. And Belzec is right up here, so you can see how close that was. We do have a few photos of what it looked like. So here's the town square on market day. You can see some of the Hasidic Jews in their garb there. This is looking south, we believe, based on the topography. And then here's another view of the Rinnik, or the town square, and we can locate the one of the steeples there in the background. Geospatial genealogy, this is a term that we've kind of coined, where we are linking the records that are traditionally used for genealogy, such as vital records and so on, with GIS and other geospatial technologies. This is kind of situated within the field of historical GIS, and our goal is to kind of visually rebuild these lost communities. As I said, Rabaruska still is there, but the Jewish community, the Polish community are gone, those relationships are gone, and a lot of the buildings, the structures, the synagogue, the ritual bath, and those things are gone as well. And so what we want to do is kind of reconstruct and rediscover those lost patterns. Sometimes we talk of micro versus macro genealogy. We're working with a man named Daniel Wagner in Israel, who is an expert in academic genealogy. He's in the process of putting together a book. But the idea of microgenealogy is this is traditionally what you might think of creating your family tree and researching your family tree. Whereas macrogenealogy, Wagner would call this a community forest instead of a community tree, where you look at maybe all the people or most of the people within that community and then start to look at what their interrelationships are. Who was the ritual slaughterer in the Jewish community, because that meant that my ancestor would have known that person. Or who were the midwives who were not only serving the Jewish community but also the Ukrainian and Polish communities. And so you start to see those larger relationships. Some of our genealogical data sources are some of the things you might expect, vital records, but some you might not expect. There's what's called the tabular register, and then also a particular set of records called the Kollel Galicia records. And I should say this up front, that Karen is the one that has done all this work. I'm kind of a Johnny-come-lately in a way. I said, boy, let's see what we can do with, let's put this in GIS, that's the way I think. But she's spent tens of thousands of dollars and thousands of hours of research. She's extracted something like 25,000 records. And so it's a real labor of love for her, and it is a lot of labor. But here's an example of a marriage record. Here's an example of the tabular registers. The tabular registers are interesting because they're records of contracts. And so you've got the index records, and then you've got the actual full contract there. And then these are the Kollel Galicia records, which are in Jerusalem, and she's visited there several times, as well as the museums and archives in Lviv and Warsaw. But these are interesting records because they're records of financial donations by the Jews of Ravaruska and other villages, but the Jews of Ravaruska supporting indigent scholars who were studying in Israel. And so a person would go around every year and collect these contributions, and you can actually put on a map and visualize where this person went, and you can put together the names with the locations, and so you can kind of reconstruct that map. We haven't done that yet, but that's one of our hopes. The key to all this is this cadastral map from 1854. The Austrians did all this cadastral mapping, the Austrian Empire, and came up with these fantastic maps. And this is really how Karen and I started working together, because we were at a seminar at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, and on the very last day we started talking, and she was telling me about some of her research on her ancestors in this town called Ravaruska, and she said, "I've got this map." And of course, when I heard map, as a geographer, I got really excited, and she showed me this hand-drawn a map that she had overlaid on this, and talked about the cadastral map, and that was kind of the beginning of our working relationship about 3 years ago. So cadastral mapping, I think a lot of you know this, but basically cadastral maps are land ownership maps. And the main reason that communities do this is for taxation, and that's why the Austrian Empire did it. But they also show things like, or they can show things like building numbers or addresses, which is key to us. You might have property values. In this case, you've got what the structure was made of. Was it wood or brick, and some of those kinds of things. And so, like I say, the Austrian Empire did a lot of this in the 1800s, and a lot of that is preserved in different archives. So, putting these two together, GIS and Geospatial Genealogy, what I want to do is use GIS as kind of the spatial engine to put all this research that Karen has been doing to build a community forest spatially, so we can look at these relationships. So now we can look at, we can do database creation, and once you do the database, then you can query it and map it and start looking at some of these things. One of the issues we have, and I'm not going to talk much about this today, but it's, there are also huge genealogy databases, a lot of them in this GEDCOM file format. The problem is that they don't talk to each other well, genealogy databases and GIS databases. I'll just set that aside, but that's one of our kind of grand challenges. So GIS databases, how many of you have GIS experience? Some? Okay. I never know for sure who has said what. Basically, in a GIS database, the key piece of information is the location. And by location, I mean not something like street address, but something like the latitude and longitude, or the UTM, the Universal Transverse Mercator map coordinates, or something like that. Something so that if you gave somebody that coordinate, and put it in a GPS, they could walk there, for example. And so everything else in the GIS database is tied to that. So it might be the name of the property owner, or it might be the address, or it might be, you know, the fire hydrant nearby, the number of occupants, and on and on and on. And if you live in Lawrence or any other community, every community in the U.S. now has GIS. And so all their roads and all their homes are in this system. So putting a cadastral map in GIS, so we've got these hard copy cadastral maps that the Austrian Empire created. So how do we get that into GIS? Well, first thing you do is you need to scan it or photograph it. And then you need to do what's called georeferencing or rectifying it. And that is putting this map into modern day coordinates. So putting it into some kind of map coordinates like latitude and longitude. Then you need to digitize the houses and other buildings that you want in there. By digitizing, basically, I mean just outlining them on the screen and then putting them into what we would call a spatial database. And then once you've done that, once you've got the house database, this spatial database, then you can add all the what we call attributes on top of that. So the property owner and the house number and dates and places and events, you know, births and all those things that happen at this location. Here's Karen's hand-drawn map, the thing that really piqued my attention because this is kind of GIS 1.0, kind of creating a photocopy of the map and then writing on top of it the information, and that's what got me excited about GIS. So again, here's the RAVA GIS map in GIS, and you can see the grid lines on top of it. So the red houses are in brick, the yellow houses are wood, and then we're zoomed out too much here, but there's a lot number written on each house. And that's one of the keys, because if you can get from a lot number to a person's name, an owner's name, then you can get something interesting. So here's just, so here I am just digitizing those, put the map up on the screen and then outline each one of those houses. Some of you probably done that. Not really exciting work, but you have to do it. Then once you get done, here's a map of all the houses in Rava Ruska. And then you put it on top of the map, and then you've got that house layer. So now it's in GIS. Now you've got that spatial database. Now what you have to do is, one of our keys was, so we got that lot number, and as I digitized each one of the houses, I would enter the lot number. One of the things we discovered a little bit belatedly, it's a little embarrassing, I'll tell you a side story, I found that later if you want, but the lot numbers are not the same as the house numbers. And so as they do censuses and taxation, they assign house numbers. And so what we need is kind of a Rosetta Stone that links house numbers to lot numbers, and this is it right here. We can see for Israel Grauer, we can see his house number here and his lot number, so now we've got it. So now we've got a house number tied to the lot number that is in that spatial database, and now we can do some things. Here's what we call the attribute database. It's pretty partial at this point. I'm sorry you can't read this, but here's parcel number, house number, the 1854, the surname of the person who was there in 1854, their given name, and then religion. You know, it seems politically incorrect to us, but in those days, of course, they always entered the religion of the person, especially if they were Jews, and so now we've got something else we can map. And so this is, Karen entered this in a spreadsheet, I cleaned it up a little bit, and then imported it into GIS. And this becomes what we call the attribute table, or the database table. So, now that we've got that built, let's see how we can use that. So what we can do is just click on the house. So I've clicked on this one, we see it outlined in red. And this house belongs to a guy named Gabriel Tauber, who is Jewish. And we see that his house number is 408, the parcel number is 163. Or we can do another query. This is called a query by location. We see this house down here, out a little bit more in the surrounding area, the rural area. And this belongs to a man by the name of Martin Slepakora. And he's Christian, house number 177, parcel number 285. So you can see the kinds of things we can do. Now let's do something a little more advanced. Let's build, I noticed when I was looking at the database that this name Slepakora is pretty common. So let's find all the houses that belong to this Slepakora family. So what I can do is pop up this little query table and window, and if you've used Access or anything like that, you know the query language, you know. And this is nice because we've got the different attributes that we can select up here, so the parcel number or the house number or the surname, and then we can all the operators down here, so greater than, less than, equal to, so you don't have to write it in, you can just click on those. And then after you've done that, you can get a unique value. So the unique value for surname, in this case, is Slepakura. And so here's the way it looks. So I click on 1854 surname, and it brings that down. Then I click on equals, and then I bring up this field here, and I select Slepakura, and so that's my query. And so let's see what that looks like. And so all these are the homes that belong to people in the Slepakura extended family. And so now you can start to see some patterns. These people are not Jewish, and we see that they are living kind of on the outskirts. So that's kind of an interesting thing in itself. Another thing we can do is have a much larger query. So we can query for all the Jewish residents, for example. So we click on religion, and then equals, and then J, which is the code in our database for Jewish, and then there's the map of all the Jewish homes in Rabaruska. This kind of confirms what we had known, or had thought we had known, that Karen had noticed that the Jews were living primarily concentrated around the market square, around the Rynek, not surprisingly also in this area around the synagogue, and that the Christians are living mostly in the surrounding areas on the outskirts, which matches a lot of what we know about that time and area. Let's look at Google Earth a little bit, if we've got a little bit of time. Any cadastral map, or actually any map that's accurately surveyed, and these are pretty good maps, can be added into Google Earth as an image overlay. And so once you've got that and you've kind of rectified it a little bit, then you can use a slider to adjust the transparency, and so you can essentially look at before and after. So you can look at the cadastral map in 1854 and then adjust this slider, and you can see what the town looks like now. Any of you ever done anything like that? It's awesome. What? Yeah, it's really, first time we did it, we were just blown away ourselves. So then it becomes a tool for looking at what features have disappeared and which are still there, or remnants of them. Here's the Google Earth view of Rabaruska today, imagery from 2009. Here's actually an image I bought that is a winter scene, and so you see all this snow around, and you can see the streets. I use the term ghost features and relic features. Ghost features are those features that used to be in the landscape that have now disappeared essentially entirely. Relic features are features that the features that have survived, or perhaps a remnant of it, a stone wall or a foundation is still there. And so we'll take a look at that. Here's an example. Here's the Google Earth imagery on the left, and then the cadastral map on the right. And we can see the town hall in the middle of the square and the synagogue. Both of these that were there in 1854 are now gone. That's where the synagogue was, and that's where the city hall was. Some relic features, the two Christian churches here and here, that's 1854, and so they're still there as of right now. Let me if I can get Google Earth to work. It's always you guys all know that the president of Google Earth is actually Lawrence. He's a KU grad, and so that's why when you bring up Google Earth, it always zooms into Lawrence, Kansas. It's awesome. He was actually just here last week and gave a presentation at Haskell. Brian McClendon, very interesting guy. So let's fly over to Rabaruska, and hopefully this will work. And so you can see so I put this in as an overlay. So you take a slider back and forth, and so you can see the features. You can see actually that all the buildings that were around the town square are now gone. You can see the churches there, and you can see a couple of buildings like this one here and this one here seem to still be there. I haven't visited, so I don't know for sure if those are original buildings, but you get the idea. There's also another town
I had a question really quickly.
Oh yeah, sorry.
The synagogue has disappeared as well, but I see there's another building there. Do you know what the new building is?
I don't know. Karen could probably tell us, but no, I don't. There's kind of a memorial there, and it's kind of a controversial thing. This is a really touchy subject. It's too bad Karen isn't here to talk about it, but they kind of kept that area as a memorial, and the mayor, who was the mayor, offered to build a memorial, but they wanted it to be really low-key, and one of the reasons they wanted to be low-key is because they were afraid people would be facing. One of the problems about Father Dubois, I mentioned he's done this research with the Holocaust by bullets and has identified many or perhaps most of the grave sites. He's keeping that close to the vest because it's one of those tragedies. Sometimes people go out there and dig in those areas hoping to find gold and valuables still. And so in some cases, some of the people have preserved those by putting concrete over them and so on, but that's one of the realities. So yeah, good question. So that's the Google Earth idea. I think I'm about out of time, but let me just mention a couple of other things. One is a lot of these destroyed Jewish communities created things that are called Yizkor books, and Yizkor books are memorial books of the town, of the past life, and they're a great source of information. One of the things that is in a number of these books are maps, sketch maps, so they're not drawn to scale, they're not like the cadastral maps. But here's an example. Here's the Rabaruski book map. The advantage of this is that whereas on the cadastral map, there's no identification of the Jewish cemetery or the ritual bath or any of those kind of things that would be important, but it's on here, and so it gives you some clues to be able to locate those from the cadastral map. One last thing is, a lot of times people want to be able to visit events or places that were important in their family's life, like the home, obviously, the homestead. As I mentioned, a lot of these are now ghost features. They no longer exist. Well, with the cadastral map and with Google Earth and with GPS, now what you can do is you can create a point on the map, download it to your GPS, and then use that to guide you back to that location. So you can say, you don't have to say, well, I think Grandpa's house was around here. You can stand on it and say, I know Grandpa's house was right here, and the butcher shop was over there, and the baker was over there, and the synagogue was right there. So you can actually walk right to those sites. And so, for example, here's the synagogue site. You could extract the latitude and longitude for it, or just export it and put it into GPS and then go back to the site. Another thing to do is to geotag photos. Do you know about geotagging? Anybody? Most of you do, I think. All of our smartphones now have cameras in them that geotag if you turn that on. There are also special cameras that can do it. One of the nice things about geotagging is that not everybody can go back to that village. For example, Karen works with people that are now in their 80s or 90s, don't have any hope of returning. But if you go there, take a photograph and say, yeah, this is where the synagogue was, or yeah, this is where your great-grandfather's house was. Now you can put that into Google Earth and you can open that photo and show it. Here's an example, you may or may not be interested in this, but of a geotag photo. And so showing that the GPS latitude and longitude are in there. This is one from, this has nothing to do with my talk, except 2 years ago we were in Kazakhstan doing some research, and I used a geotagging camera, and so every place we went, I used this. And this is actually a photograph of a trucker coming in from Turkmenistan. My colleagues are talking to him. And so that photo is geotagged, so you can put it in Google Earth and go exactly there and see where that is. I see that I'm out of time, so I should go ahead and wrap up. These are some of our challenges. Languages, 5 or 6 different languages for these records. Another one is that many of these records have not been filmed. Some cadastral maps have been, most have not. And then, of course, there's the access to records problem. Here's some of our dreams. We need to do a lot more exploring of patterns. We want to make this available over the web so that people can do this. One of our big dreams is to use some kind of crowdsourcing. Digitizing these is a lot of work. Extracting the names is a lot of work. And so if we could get people involved on a broad scale, that would be great. Here are some of the presentations we've given, and thank you.